As Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, the peaceful demonstrations that King called for began to end. Very quickly, protests became more violent as a violent civil rights group called the Black Panthers began to gain power. At the same time, blacks did not have the same rights as whites, not even among the elite athletes. While the best black athletes had been given scholarships, the whites still received a better education. They simply weren't permitted to receive the same level of schooling. At first, athletes did not want to be involved with the political situation, but soon enough they began to understand that the Olympics was their opportunity to make a public demonstration. In the past, the Olympics have always been a time of political protest, best represented by the Nazis' influence in the 1936 Olympics. It is not very surprising because at the time of the Olympics, the whole world is watching and media makes sure they get detailed coverage. The Olympic Project for Human Rights encouraged black American athletes to boycott the 1968 Olympics to demonstrate the mistreatment of civil rights. However, the older athletes argued that the 1968 Olympics would be their last chance to win gold. On October 16, 1968, U.S. athlete Tommie Smith placed first with a world record time in the 200-meter race. In second came Peter Norman, an Australian athlete, and in third place came U.S. athlete John Carlos. At the podium, the two U.S. athletes wore black socks but no shoes to represent black poverty. Tommie Smith also wore a black scarf, while Carlos wore a necklace with beads for those who had been lynched in the past. All of the men, including Peter Norman, wore Olympic Project for Human Rights badges. While John Smith brought black gloves, Tommy Carlos forgot his. Norman then suggested that one of them wears the left-handed glove and the other the right-handed one. Then, the two African American athletes raised their hands suggesting a Black Power salute while the Star-Spangled Banner played. Now here's Mr. Conroy with his recollection of the 1968 Olympics.
And there was a lot of anger from the African American community about the fact that the changes were not happening at a rate that seemed reasonable. Obviously, there was a lot of anger on the part of racists who were not happy about the fact that the changes were being made in the first place. And so you had a very volatile mix at that time that was exacerbated by the Vietnam War and the fact that there was a disproportionate number of young men of color who were fighting in the Vietnam War, who were being drafted into the Vietnam War because a lot of the white kids had college deferments that were keeping them out of the draft. And so Tommie Smith and John Carlos were making a statement on the podium to indicate their dissatisfaction with the continued white hegemony that had been basically the MO of the United States since the earliest stages of the Republic. And they decided after they came in, I believe, first and third in the 100-yard dash, was it? I believe. The two. Probably the 220 at that time. It probably wasn't metric. After they came in first and third, they made a decision to make a bold statement, and they brought along black gloves. And on the medal stand, they both raised their fists with the black gloves as a show of solidarity, as a show of rejection of the values that had been subjugating them. And that was also, at that time, known. That was a very visible symbol of what was called Black Power.
Do you think that the International Olympic Committee was correct in banning Tommie Smith and John Carlos?
Not at all. Not at all. I think that the statement that they made was consistent with and appropriate to the time period. It was something that they felt they needed to do. A lot of people felt that it was inappropriate, that you shouldn't bring politics into the Olympics, but as we well know, just a few years later, the United States and the Soviet Union brought politics into the Olympics through threatened and actual boycotts. So it's a bit hypocritical of people who in 1968 to complain about politicizing the Olympics, and then the very same people went way overboard in terms of politicizing the Olympics just a few years later. So personally, I thought it was a very powerful statement. I remember that I was 14 at the time, and I grew up in a neighborhood and in a family that, quite frankly, was rather racist. And I remember that virtually everybody that I knew was horrified and appalled. I sort of privately was like, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. But I kind of had to keep that one to myself.